Hello and welcome back. So continuing with Tanya over here, what we've discussed in the last chapter is the question really, or the explanation, how is it that God didn't change? From before the world was created to after the world was created. The world and all of existence didn't affect a change in God. So to begin to explain, we gave a parable of one word by a person. And we said that this one word is like nothing, is valueless compared to the entire power of speech, because he can speak endlessly. And it's also, how much more so, nothing and valueless next to his power of thought, which is where the words came from. And how much more so, it's valueless next to the emotions, where his thought came from. And how much more so it's valueless next to his intellect, which is where his emotions came from. So now we're going to bring this parable to explain how the world doesn't take up space and doesn't change and affect God. As follows, Perek Chaf Aleph, chapter 21. The attribute of Hashem, of God, is not like the attribute of man. It's a famous quote. It's brought in many places. In the sense that, as follows, Sheha'adam keshemedaber dibur, harei hakol harei hevel hadibur, shebepiv hu murkash v'nire davach b'fnei atzmo, muvdal mishorsho, shehen esech b'chinot hanefesh atzma. Why? What's the difference? That is as follows. When a person of flesh and blood, speaks a word, the breath of this word in his mouth is felt, meaning it has a substance, it's tangible. And it is viewed as something in and of itself. The word is an identity. It has its own identity. Separate from the source of the word, which is, like we said before, the 10 aspects of the soul, the intellect and the emotions. It becomes separated from one's intellect and emotions. As soon as one speaks, then that speech becomes separated and disconnected from its origin, the intellect and emotions. However, it's not so by God. God, his speech is not separated from him, blessed be he, God forbid. Being that there is nothing outside of God. It's a quote from various places, Kabbalah, I believe. And there is no place void of him. Even God's speech isn't void of God, because nothing is void of God. And it's not outside of God, because nothing is outside of God. So the speech of God doesn't disconnect from him. And for that very reason, nothing is void of God and nothing is outside of God. His speech is not like our speech, God forbid. Just like his thoughts are not like our thoughts. As for more about that, see the second part of Tanya, chapter 7. Kedichtiv, ki lo machshavotay machshavotechem. Uktiv, ken gavhudach kai medach megomer, as it says in the verse, for my thoughts are not like your thoughts. Are not your thoughts. And it says that my ways are exalted from your ways. ולא נקרא דיבורו יתברך בשם דיבור רק על דרך משל. And the only way that God's speech has any kind of connotation to speech is just a form of example to express an idea. In what sense? כמו שדיבור התחתון שבאדם הוא מגלה לשון ממה שהיה צפון ונעלם במחשבתו, כך למעלה באינסוף ברוך הוא יציאת האור והחיות ממנו יתברך, מההלם אל הגילו לברוא עולמות ולהחיותם נקרא בשם דיבור. That just like by the speech below of a man, of a person, reveals to the listeners what was hidden deep in his thought, so too above, when it comes to the infinite one, blessed be he, the coming out of the light and energy from him, blessed be he, from a concealed state to a revealed state, to create the worlds and to give them life, that is called speech. So when we say speech in reference to Hashem, what we mean is not that it's, God forbid, outside of him. No, that's not the case. But what we mean is it's a revelation. Speech is a revelation of one's thought. So God's speech is a revelation from a higher level to a lower level. והן הן 10 המאמרות שבהן נברא העולם. And these, what exactly is this speech? It is the 10 utterances through which the world was created. The world was created through 10 utterances. God spoke and the world came to be. So that is the revelation of the world that we call God's speech. וכן שאר כל התוך הנביאים וכתובים שהשיגו הנביאים במערכת נבואתם, and another example in which we see God's speech, another way, is the Tanakh, that the prophets were able to grasp with the vision of their prophecy. When prophets had a vision, they were envisioning God's speech. What does it mean, God's speech? God spoke to them like their friend, saying hello? No. God revealed something to them. Revealed some sort of light. God's words. He revealed something that was hidden and revealed it to them. Now, we have now we understand what we mean when we say God's speech. Now with that, והרי דיבורו מחשבתו כביכול מיוחדות עמו בתכלית הייחוד. God's speech and God's thought, so to speak, are united with him in complete unison. Different than by us, right? Different than by man. By man, we said the speech is separate from him. So, derech mashal. So what would be the way to understand that God's speech is united with him? The example of the parable is, כמו דיבור או מחשבתו של אדם בעודן בכוח חוכמתו ושכלו, או בתשוקה וחמדה שבליבו, קודם שלטה מהלב למוח להכרח בה, בבחינת האותיות. שאז היו אותיות המחשבה והדיבור הזה הנמשך מחמדה ותשוקה זו בכוח בלב, ומייחדות שם בתכלית הייחוד. בשורשם. This is like the speech and the thought of a person while they're still in potential in their intellect or the simple desire and the emotions in the heart before they actually rise up from the heart to the mind to think thoughts in those words, in a form of actual words, that at that stage, the words of the thought, not the words, the words or the letters of the thought and the speech that came out from this desire were in complete potential in the heart and united over there in complete unity in their source. And that source is the intellect and the wisdom in the mind and the desire and yearning in the heart. That is, how can we understand God's speech now? God's speech is just like, to him, just like in complete unison with him, so to speak, like our speech was in unison before we spoke it. Before we spoke our speech, and same thing before we thought our thought, that speech and that thought wasn't actualized. It was sitting in potential where? In the emotions of the heart. And even before that, in the intellect and the mind. Now at that stage, before we thought and before we spoke, while it was still in the emotions, while still in the intellect, it is in unison with us. It is the fiber of our being. It didn't actually come out of us yet. So where that thought and speech are holding before everything in potential, in unison with us, so too God's speech doesn't actually change. Yeah. Even God, even after God, so to speak, speaks and creates the world and so on, it didn't actually come into actuality. It's still in potential. It didn't go through a process of leaving him. That doesn't happen. It stays within him. It stays united within him. And everything that you see in the world, which is, like we said, the effect of God's speech, is still in unison with him, in complete and utter unison with him. And now we can understand what it means that he didn't change, because nothing actually left him. The same way that by a person, our thought and speech are in unison with us before we speak it, before it leaves us, so too the speech of God is in unison at the very moment now, because it never leaves him. It's still in unison with him. So he never changed. In essence, he never changed. The same way it was in unison before he spoke, so too it's in unison with him after he speaks. This is exactly what we're going to say right now. וככה ממש דרך משל, מיוחד או דיבור ומחשבתו של הקדוש ברוך הוא, בתכלית הייחוד, במהותו ובעצמותו יתברך, גם אחר שיצא דיבור הוא יתברך אלא פועל בבריאת העולמות. כמו שהיה מיוחד עמו קודם בריאת העולמות, ואין שום שינוי כלל לפניו יתברך. So that is the parable to explain that the speech of God and the thought of God are united in complete unison with his essence. Blessed be he. Even after it came into a revealed state, into the effect of the creation of the worlds, just like it was in unison before the worlds were created. And there is no change at all in front of him, blessed be he. So now we can understand what it means that God is truly one, and God didn't change. אלא אל הבחורים המקבלים חיותו מבחינת דיבורו יתברך. בבחינת יציאת הגבר אל הפועל בבריאת העולמות, שמתלבש בהם להחיות על ידי השתלשלות מעילה לעל וביחידת המדרגות ובצמצומים רבים שונים. עד שיוכלו הברואים לקבל חיותם ויתהוותם ממנו, ולא יתפתרו במציאות. So now, before the question still stands, yeah? Before there wasn't a world, and now there is a world. We see clearly there's a world around us. So how can we say that nothing changed? So the answer is that is when it comes to God's perspective. From God's perspective, everything is united with Him. And for that reason, it's like it doesn't exist. But by us, by our perspective, there is a change. Those that receive this revelation, which is the creation, by them, by us, there is that by the receivers that receive their life from His speech, blessed be He, when in the sense that it comes out in effect with the creation of the worlds, that the speech comes into them to give them life through a chain of effects from cause and effect and a decrease in levels, contraction after contraction, many contractions and different contractions, until the creations would be able to receive their life force and their creative force from Him without becoming nullified. It's like very simple. It's like if you have a plug from one country and an outlet from another country. This outlet, let's say, pumps a lot of electricity, way more electricity than the plug can handle. So what's going to happen if you put the plug in? Then it's whatever the machine is, it's going to just explode, or not actually explode, but die. I actually had this example personally. I had a blender from America. I tried plugging it into an Israeli outlet, and the electricity voltage in Israel is apparently way too strong for this blender, and as soon as I plugged it in, the blender was finished and it wouldn't turn on again because it had too high of a surge of energy. So the same thing is when God creates the world, He needs to dim down the energy, and not just dim it down a little, but dim it down so much so that we can receive our life force from Him. Because if He would put His pinky finger between, put His pinky finger in our world, then the world would cease to exist from the great surge of revelation. And therefore, for us, we have a dimmed down version of reality. And we don't see everything behind the picture, behind the scenes, but it's a smoke screen. It's a smoke screen that blinds us, but it doesn't blind God. And by God's point of view, everything is like it was before it was created, now, even afterward. It's like it doesn't exist. It doesn't have any value in front of Him. It's like the example that's famously given is when a teacher wants to give something over to their student, then if they're going to tell the student the subject the way they understand it on the teacher's level, what's going to happen is the student's not going to be able to withstand the wisdom. So instead, the teacher has to say the teaching in different words, in words that are watered down, that the student can bear, can accept. And then the student can listen in to what the teacher's saying, can understand and conceive that idea. So by the teacher, because they are the ones that explained it to the student in that watered down way, when the teacher has a look at that explanation, at that watered down explanation, then they see all the depth within those words that he changed. The student doesn't see all the depth. The student doesn't really know everything yet until he really thinks about it for years and years, and then maybe he can reach the depth. So the same thing is with the creation of the worlds. For Hashem to create the worlds, for God to create the world, he couldn't give us over reality the way it is by him. Because what's reality the way it is by God? He is one and nothing else exists. So there's no room for a world in that great plane of reality. Instead, what he had to do is make a kind of coding that changes the view of reality, for there to be a receiver to understand what's going on. God had to create a world that would basically water down the truth, which is that God is one, and allow us to exist, simply. But because he created it, therefore, when he looks at our world, our watered down world, what does he see? He sees the depth behind it. He sees the truth in that all is one. God is one. When we look at the world, we see a house, a car, a mountain, a river, whatever. We don't necessarily see the truth, the depth behind it. We see our watered down version. But the depth behind this reality is the one God. And that is how we can understand that God is one and didn't change. וכל הצמצומים הם בחינת הסתך פנים, להסתיך ולהעלים האור והחיות הנמשך מדיבורו יתברך. שלא יתגלה בבחינת גילוי רב, שלא יוכלו התחתונים לקבל. And all of the contractions are, what are they? What's a contraction? That means a concealment. To conceal and hide the light and vitality that is brought down from his speech, blessed be he, that it shouldn't be revealed in its full form, in such a great revelation, that the lower worlds, the lower levels, shouldn't be able to receive them. So that is what God does. He conceals it. He conceals this great revelation in order that we should be able to receive it. ולכן גם כן נדמה להם אור וחיות הדיבור של מקום ברוך הוא המלובש בהם כאילו הוא דבר מובדל ממהותו ועצמותו יתברך. רק שנמשך ממנו יתברך כמו דיבור של האדם מנפשו. And therefore, it also appears to them, to the lower worlds, to us, to the lower levels, that this light and vitality of the speech of God, blessed be he, that is within them, is like it is disconnected from his essence, blessed be he. And it just comes down from him, blessed be he, like the speech of man from his soul, which the speech of man from his soul is disconnected from him. So our appearance of reality, the way reality appears to us, is that the words of God that come into us, into the world, separated themselves from God's essence. But that's the way we see it. And shum tzimtzum v'hestech v'hedem mastich u'malim lefanav. But when it comes to Hashem, the God, there is no contraction and concealment and smokescreen that is hiding and concealing in front of him. He sees everything. And in front of God, darkness is like light. As it says in the verse, also darkness will not become dark from you, and the nighttime will light up like daytime. God doesn't see darkness, so to speak. For God, darkness is like light. Because why is it that God sees everything as it is in its depth and its truth? Because none of the contractions and garments of concealment are really separate from Him. Blessed be He, God forbid. Really, they are united with Him. Rather, it's like the turtle or the snail whose shell comes from it. The shell is the outside, rock-hard part of the snail or the turtle. But nevertheless, even though it's so material and so corporeal, I suppose, it is still part of the turtle. It came from the turtle. As it says, because Havaya is one name of God and Elokim is another name of God, they are the same. What are Havaya and Elokim? Havaya is revelation. Elokim is concealment. For in truth, revelation and the concealment is part of the same God. They are all united with God. As it says in another place, I believe that's referring to part 2 of Tanya. Make sure to check that out. Chapter 7, chapter 6, chapter 4, chapter 5, all those chapters over there. And for that reason, because God's thoughts and speech, as we said, are united with Him completely, therefore, in front of Him, from His point of view, everything is as if it doesn't exist, literally. And therefore, that answers our question, how come God didn't change? Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed.